رسوله الكريم وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأشهد أن محمدًا عبده ورسوله اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين أما بعد. There's a narration collected by both Bukhari and Muslim in which the Prophet ﷺ tells us that Surah Ikhlas ta'dilu thuluth al-Quran. That Surah Ikhlas, قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ, say Allah is one and unique, Allahu Samad, He is the majestic, the one to whom all others turn and He turns to no other. Lam yalid walam yulad, He neither has offspring, He has neither been begotten nor does He beget. Walam yakun lahu kufuwan ahad, and none is like unto He. That this chapter, these verses, the Prophet ﷺ tells us that they are the equivalent of a third of the Quran. Now, many of us have heard this narration before, or at least we've heard the meaning of this narration, that قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ is the equivalent of a third of the Quran. But what does it really mean? The scholars of Islam differ slightly on exactly what is meant by a third of the Quran. Is it a third in reward, meaning the one who recites it, it's as if he has recited a third of the Quran? And there is evidence to back something like this up. For instance, the Prophet ﷺ said to Abu Bakr as-Siddiq and a number of the companions around him, he said, "Who of you can recite Surah Al-Baqarah every night?" Meaning before he goes to bed. The companion said, "And who of us is able to do that?" It's not just they're not able to do that because they don't have the tenacity or they don't have the drive. They certainly have that. They just don't have the time in the day, because many of them recited a third of the Quran every day, a fourth of the Quran every day, a seventh of the Quran every day. They had a wird, along with the adhkar of morning and evening and adhkar before going to bed. There's just not enough time in the day. So they said, "And who of us is able to do that?" He said, "Certainly he who recites the last two verses of Surah Al-Baqarah every night, it's as if he has recited Surah Al-Baqarah," meaning in reward. However, really the meaning of Surah Al-Ikhlas, this chapter, is equivalent to a third of the Quran, is because the Quran has three main subjects, three discourses, three topics that the Quran is speaking about. These are the three branches of knowledge in the Quran. The scholars tell us that the Quran is divided into three categories. There is that of it which is the description of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's a third of the Quran. And the second third of the Quran, not in order, not in succession, but if we were to divide up all of the verses of the Quran and categorize all the meanings, a third of the Quran is about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, His names, His attributes, His actions, His doings subhanahu wa ta'ala, His creation, all about Allah. The second third is about stories, history, stories of the prophets and messengers, stories of the wicked, stories of those who end up in paradise, and stories of the people of hell. The third category is ahkam, laws and jurisprudence. And so when we look at the Quran in this general way, we see that one third of the Quran is dedicated explicitly to the descriptions of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to His names, His attributes, everything about Him. And this is one of the main the main things that the prophets and messengers came to teach us. Every prophet, every messenger, what is the gist of his message? He came to teach us who to worship, and he came to teach us how to worship. That is essentially what the prophets and messengers were sent for. And so a third of the Quran is about Allah explicitly. And Surah Ikhlas, it is referred to as the chapter that is specific. Ikhlas meaning ukhlisat li dhikrillah, meaning it is explicitly and only about Allah. Or it is referred to as al-Ikhlas because it is the path to true sincerity and worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But Surah Al-Ikhlas, it sums up the main and essential names and attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so all other meanings of the Quran that speak about Allah and His names and attributes, they all root back to Surah Al-Ikhlas. قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ اللَّهُ الصَّمَدُ لَمْ يَلِدْ وَلَمْ يُولَدْ وَلَمْ يَكُنْ لَهُ كُفُوًا أَحَدٌ. And so it is a third of the Quran. There's a narration which has been collected by Imam Muslim. This narration is on the authority of Abi Dharr al-Ghifari, radiyallahu anhu. This narration was included by Al-Hafidh al-Imam al-Nawawi, rahimahullah, in his 40 narrations, because this narration, it expounds upon the nature of our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If we were to say a narration to the rest of the narrations of the Prophet that is like Surah Al-Ikhlas is to the rest of the verses of the Quran, it would be this narration. It is a holistic narration, and all other narrations that have to do with the relationship between us and Allah and the names and attributes of Allah, they all refer back to this. They are all referenced back to the essential meanings of this narration. This is a narration which is referred to as Hadithun Qudsi. It is considered to be a holy narration. Qudsi. What does that mean, as holy narration? What it means is that any narration in which the Prophet ﷺ tells us Allah said, and it is not part of the Quran, it is referred to by the scholars of Hadith as Hadithun Qudsi. That is its categorization. It means the Prophet ﷺ is telling us that Allah said, and this is not part of the Quran. This is something that he either received in a vision, or Jibreel alayhi salam recited to him, but it was not as Quran, or he received in some other way of revelation. The Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam says, قال الله عز وجل يا عبادي إني حرمت الظلم على نفسي وَجَعَلْتُهُ بَيْنَكُمْ مُحَرَّمًا فَلَا تَظَالَمُوا. My servants, indeed I have made oppression and wrongdoing prohibited upon my own self, so do not be oppressive to one another. This introduces a very interesting question, and that is oppression, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has prohibited upon himself oppression. Sometimes you read explanations of this narration, and people will say things like, everything belongs to Allah. And the essence of oppression is that a person do something with that which he does not possess, which is not his, to interfere with the property of others. But everything belongs to Allah. So therefore, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not oppress. This is incorrect. Because this essentially is saying, this explanation is essentially saying, Allah cannot oppress. And if that's the case, then there's no praise in that. Like for instance, stoicism, a person being few in words. This is something praiseworthy, but it's praiseworthy only if you choose to be stoic. But a person who is dumb, person who cannot speak, it's not praiseworthy to say, so-and-so is few in words. He can't speak. He has no choice. He's few in words because he doesn't have the ability to do so. This is not praise. This is actually a kind of sarcasm. Rather, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has chosen to be just with his servants, subhanahu wa ta'ala. No one has obligated upon him. There are no cosmic laws that he has to abide by. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does what he wants, when he wants, and he has to seek no permission from none. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has described himself as فَعَّالٌ لِمَا يُرِيدُ. He is the doer of whatever he chooses, subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yet of his mercy and of his grace and of his honor, subhanahu wa ta'ala, he has chosen not to treat his subjects or to treat his creation with oppression. He says, يَا عِبَادِي إِنِّي حَرَّمْتُ الظُّلْمَ عَلَى نَفْسِي وَجَعَلْتُهُ بَيْنَكُمْ مُحَرَّمًا فَلَا تَظَالَمُوا. يَا عِبَادِي كُلُّكُمْ عَارٍ إِلَّا مَنْ كَسَيْتُهُ فَاسْتَكْسُونِي أُكْسِكُمْ. He says, my servants, all of you is naked, except for those whom I clothe. So seek clothing from me, and I shall clothe you. يا عبادي كلكم جائع إلا من أطعمته فاستطعموني أطعمكم. My servants, all of you, is hungry except for those whom I feed. So seek sustenance from me, and I shall feed you. يا عبادي كلكم ضال إلا من هديته فاستهدوني أهدكم. My servants, all of you, and each of you is misguided, save for those whom I guide. So seek guidance from me, and I shall guide you. يا عبادي إنكم تخطئون بالليل والنهار وأنا أغفر الذنوب جميعا فاستغفروني أغفر لكم. My slaves, my servants, each and all of you commit sins in the day and night, and I forgive all sin. So seek my forgiveness, and I shall forgive you. يا عبادي إنكم لن تبلغوا ضري فتضروني ولن تبلغوا نفعي فتنفعوني. My servants, you can never reach my level of harm to be able to harm me, nor can you ever reach my level of benefit so that you may benefit me. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not harmed or benefited by any of his creation, subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is really altruism in its true fashion. What is altruistic? That you do something for another, taking no reward, no recompense. The human being, it is impossible for you to be purely altruistic. It's impossible. There's always something in it for you. It's just what is in it for you. Is it money, or is it reward with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? That's the extent of our altruism. In order for you to be truly and thoroughly altruistic, you have to be not in need of anything. And that is not our state of being. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, Ya ayyuhan nas, antumul fuqara'u ila Allah. Allahu huwa al-ghani. O people, O mankind, you all are impoverished to Allah. You all are absolutely impoverished to Allah. And Allah is the one who is in need of none, subhanahu wa ta'ala. He says, Ya ibadi, لو أن أولكم وآخركم وإنسكم وجنكم كانوا على أتقى قلب رجل منكم ما زاد ذلك في ملكي شيئا. He said, my servants, you will never reach my level of harm to be able to harm me, nor my level of benefit to where you can benefit me. My servants, if all of you, the first of you and the last of you, the human of you and the jinn of you, all had the heart of the most righteous man amongst you, this would not increase my dominion and what I have anything. So he is not benefited by our righteousness. He said, يا عبادي لو أن أولكم وآخركم وإنسكم وجنكم كانوا على أفجر قلب رجل منكم ما نقص ذلك من ملكي شيئا. My servants, if all of you, the first of you and the last of you, the human of you and the jinn of you, all had the heart of the most wicked man amongst you, this would not deplete of my dominion anything. يا عبادي لو أن أولكم وآخركم وإنسكم وجنكم قاموا في صعيد واحد فسألوني فأعطيت كل واحد مسألة ما نقص ذلك مما عندي إلا كما ينقص المخيط إذا أدخل البحر. He said, my servants, if all of you, collectively, the human of you, the jinn of you, the first of you and the last of you, all stood on one level ground, and each asked me everything they could ever desire, and I gave to each everything he asked, this would not deplete from that which I have in my dominion, except that which a needle depletes when it is inserted into the ocean and taken out. يا عبادي إنما هي أعمالكم أحصيها لكم ثم أوفيكم إياها. My servants, it is merely your deeds, which I shall calculate for you, preserve, and then recompense you for. فَمَنْ وَجَدَ خَيْرًا فَلْيَحْمَدِ اللَّهِ. And upon such recompense, whoever receives good, then upon him is to thank Allah. وَمَنْ وَجَدَ غَيْرَ ذَلِكَ فَلَا يَلُومَنَّ إِلَّا نَفْسَهُ. And whoever receives upon such recompense other than good, then he has no one to blame but his own self. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that he teach us of his names and attributes. We ask him subhanahu wa ta'ala that he make us of those who hear the truth and are those who are shown the truth, have the insight and enlightenment to recognize and distinguish it from falsehood. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that he give us the courage to follow the truth in spite of its consequences and to die for and upon that truth and to be resurrected amongst its people. Wallahu a'lam wa sallallahu wa sallam ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa jazakumullahu khairan.